When we were young, we read more often because we had to. It was the only way for us to get knowledge and to be enlightened. Read to your heart's delight and be enlightened. Let's just read. It's a podcast by Andy's Personal Development. Stay tuned for more reading and enlightenment. Okay, so we are live here in the studios of Let's Just Read, and our guest is Janet Sherlund. And this episode is entitled The Search for Identity with Janet Sherlund. Now, let us introduce our guest by telling you a bit about her. She is the author of a book, or what we call a heart wrenching memoir, entitled Abandoned at Birth, Searching for the Arms That Once Held Me. And we're going to speak a whole lot about that book and the experience that she has had to bring her to the place where she decided to share that memoir experience with the rest of the world. So, without further ado, let's introduce our special guest on Let's Just Read podcast, Janet Sherlund. Welcome, Janet.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you, and indeed, we are very thankful that you have decided to do this wonderful work. A little disturbance there.
I forgot
It's
to
all
mute my phone. Sorry, I'll do that right now.
Yeah, it's all good. And we are happy to welcome you into the studios of Let's Just Read so that you can share all the valuable nuggets with us.
Thank you.
So, Janet, we have a lot to share and to speak about. And of course, the focus is the memoir that you have taken the time to so preciously write. Who is Janet Sherlund in a nutshell?
I'm an adoptee, and I
Ah,
think that is the most significant fact of my life. I was given away at birth. My birth mother never looked at me or had any interest in me, gave me away to the first opportunity to an agency suggested by a hospital nurse. And that fact shaped my entire life. And that abrupt disconnection from my biological heritage and identity, and then being handed to strangers and living a borrowed life, as I call it, or a false identity. I had a name and a heritage assigned to me by my adoptive family. That and the underlying sense of disconnection, of otherness, of grief and loss that I felt but didn't understand at the time shaped who I was, and the chronic anxiety I lived with really deterred so many the freedom of choice I might have otherwise had in living my life. So that is really the defining fact of my life.
and how did that understanding of that personal experience help define you and the character that you now have as Janet Sherlund? What impact did it make on you becoming who you are today?
I think the constant sense, this constant confusion over who I was, and one of the things I've discovered in my journey is how chemical, how cellular our sense of belonging and identity is. So if you are not connected to your biological heritage and to your biological family, if you're not seeing yourself mirrored in the actions and interests and temperaments of the people around you, you're really struggling you learn so much through your biological and historical information of your family. And when you've been removed from that, you're just floundering. You have nothing to go on. In my case, adopted during the baby scoop era and a closed adoption, I had absolutely no information about myself. I didn't know what my ethnic heritage was. I didn't know where I came from or anything about myself. And so, and I knew I could feel growing up. There were four of us. We were all adopted by my adopted parents. We were all from different biological families. And even though we had a perfectly fine adoptive home, you could feel that we didn't belong to each other. You know,
Yeah.
we cared about each other. We took care of each other, but we weren't the same. We all had our separate DNA. We all had our separate, everything that made us and formed us, and that we had brought through time with ourselves. And I felt that emptiness and that confusion and that loss every day. Even as a child, it's like, I know I'm not who I'm pretending to be. I'm not Janet Leaf with a Swedish heritage. I don't know what I am, but I know I'm not that. And that there was a compulsion, there was a drive in me to find out, who am I? And I think that drive comes from trying to heal the pain and the wound. It was like thinking, if only I can reconnect with that source
Mm,
of my life, that
yeah.
biological connection, then I'll feel whole again, and I'll feel complete, and I'll understand myself. So that the loss and the grief that I was feeling and not understanding drove me to, just drove me. Some people have said, "Oh, you're so brave to take this search." I don't see it that way. I was literally driven to try and reconnect with the beginning of my life, and figure out who this person was authentically and fully.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Janet. And I can hear the passion in your voice and certainly understand the impact. What drove you to do the research? What was the epiphany moment that you decided, you know what? I'm going to do some research into my background, into my heritage, because I need to know clearly the details of what happened. What drove you to make that decision?
I think it was sort of accidental. First, I'll preface that by saying I was always a reader. I loved to read as a child. I loved to read and I loved to write. And it's interesting that when I think back, some of my favorite books, a lot of my favorite books were biographies. So I guess I always had a hunger to know about a real person's life. But it was in college when I took a class that had components of childhood development. And I was an art and English major. So I typically wasn't taking the social sciences, but I took a class that had this in it. And the child development information was sort of like a light bulb. And I went, oh, wow. There's this whole study of how we form ourselves as human beings and what happens in that infant's brain. And infants are not blank slates. Babies are not blank slates that all they need is love, the love of strangers, and they'll be happy. There's stuff happening in utero and stuff happening right after birth. And that was that made me hungry to try and find all sorts of other information out. And as I dug deeper, I found I was in college in the 1970s, so this is going way back. But I started to find information about studies happening on adoption and adopted children, and that opened up another world of, trying to, and we had no DNA testing then. We didn't have the web. We didn't have, you were looking at books and magazine articles and going to the library and looking at microfiche. I mean, it was a very different kind of research, but it was just so freeing and so affirming to start reading about the experience of other adoptees and what the professionals were learning about what happens in adoption. And it was like, oh my God, I'm not alone. I'm not
Mm,
alone. And
yeah.
and real people who study this, scientists and social scientists are affirming this. It's not just me making it up, or it's not just me trying to assure myself this is real. So that was a real watershed moment.
Wow. Thank you for sharing, Janet. But in addition to that, you had some challenges when you began the search because you had some false narratives that were provided by the adoption agency.
Yes.
How does these false details impact your journey, and what advice would you give to others that are experiencing similar situations and need proper guidelines so that they can know the truth?
Yeah. First of all, I say it sounds very cynical, but don't trust any institution. I
Uh,
mean, institutions, look at their motivation. In my case, and I must say, I've worked with my adoption agency, helped me ultimately, 10 years ago, search and reunite with birth parents. But prior to that, especially in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, these institutions were designed to adopt children out to their families, and they promised the birth parents an anonymity. So they had sealed records in the state of New Jersey where I was adopted. My records are still sealed. At my age and with all my parents passed away, New Jersey still says you can't know who you are authentically. But the so don't trust an institution. Follow your gut. Follow your own lead. And yes, I wrote to my adoption agency in college. I had done an independent class on identity and adoption at Colgate University, where I went to school. And I got an A+ on the paper. So I thought, well, this validates me. And this makes me just not seem like a sad adoptee. And I'm going to write to my agency and ask for whatever information they'll give me. And they wrote back with some non-identifying information, but it wasn't only non-identifying, it was false. it
wow.
was it was designed to be the perfect narrative. Your mother was mature and thoughtful and just cared about you, and this was your father's, the little information they had about him, and everyone's healthy and everyone's happy, and the basic message was, we did a great job, you should be happy and grateful, you don't need to know anymore. You don't need to know what your authentic heritage is. That's not important. And so years later, when I was, or all through my life from that point on, as I tried to search and considered searching with no information, my anticipated answers were very different. They said your birth parents were from a distant state. They were from the very next state. They were for an hour and a half from where I grew up, but this was they from a distant state. So I'm thinking, okay, what could it be? Chicago. It turned out they were very Irish. So I'm thinking of places with a large Irish population. I mean, there were so many false directives in that letter that really were my assumptions for the rest of my life until I actually met them about who they were and what was going on. So I have learned throughout that process that you never trust an institution, and you always trust yourself, and you push beyond what you're told.
Yeah, wow. Um, I love that you're able to share the details with regards to the experience, and I know that it will help a lot of people who may have similar challenges and have to go down that kind of avenue to find information. It's amazing that after all these years, the records are still sealed and
I know.
you can actually get the names and stuff. That, I
In
mean,
40 out of our 50 states
yeah,
in the United States, the birth records are still sealed. And we
wow.
are all adults now. We are not infants. We are all adults. And you have states, you have legislators I'd be surprised if any of them were adopted, legislators, bodies saying, you don't have the right to know who you actually are. And
Wow.
we're going to keep that from you. And on my legal birth certificate, my adoptive parents' names appear. They didn't birth me. I mean, it's just crazy what the law does, and how it is basically protecting the shame, the shame of my birth mother in the 1950s, which is no longer exists in our culture. And they're saying that's more important than you as an individual and your right to know who you really are.
Yeah,
And I would argue that's not a balanced equation.
yeah, it's kind of twisted.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, stuff. Yeah. So, Janet, tell us, how challenging was it to actually put all this information together and get the final product out?
It was. It's funny. As an adoptee, I think we think if we are lucky enough to meet our birth family, that we'll have the answers. And that was truly transformational when it was actually at one point about 10 years, a little more than 10 years ago, I was talking to my adoptive mother, and I asked about our adoption agency, assuming it had long since gone out of business. And she said, no, it's still there, and they have a website. when I went on the website, I saw there was a little button on one column that said search. And it turns out that they were started after I had written to them when I was in college, but they started doing reunions. If both the adoptee and the birth parent agreed, they would connect them.
Yeah.
And so the actual, ultimately, the search wasn't difficult. I was able to apply through my agency, and they found initially my birth mother right away. Sadly, she refused to meet me, and that was very difficult.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, that was like a second rejection,
Yeah.
and I couldn't understand it. I thought, I'm a nice person. I don't need anything from you. I just want to know you. I just, don't you wonder about me? You know, am I so unimportant to you that you're going to refuse me again? She worked outside the home. You know, she didn't live in her hometown anymore. I mean, there's no reason we couldn't have met and still kept it a secret if that's what she wanted. But no. Um, they luckily had the information on my birth father, which was unusual because back in the 1950s, fathers weren't considered at all.
Yeah.
And and I reluctantly agreed to meet him because I just thought, well, I want some medical information, but I knew the man didn't even know that he had fathered me, so I really hadn't ever thought about him. It turned out to be an absolutely transformed. The minute we met, and I knew nothing about him, I couldn't have answered 5 questions about him. The minute we met, and he looked into my eyes, I was found. The big black hole inside of me filled up instantly, and I had never felt a greater sense of peace and connection and belonging that I did in that moment. And yet I didn't even know the man. And so the biology of belonging, and that it was like our cells recognized each other through time, and our and I had been wandering in the desert, and I was finally returned to my people. I mean, it was this amazing experience. And and so that was wonderful, and that, again, healed so much. But what surprised me was now I had to integrate the person I was, the adopted person I was, and the biological person I was, because I wasn't either or. I was both. And trying to figure that out and figure out how to integrate what I learned through meeting my biological families and what I had absorbed and learned growing up was a little confusing. And it was another level of work that I hadn't originally anticipated.
Yeah. Wonderful. I'm looking at this particular picture here, and I want to share it with you. And I want you to tell us what was the inspiration behind the picture, because it clearly defines the book. And I'm seeing this little girl standing there out in the open field and looking at a sunset going down, and I'm wondering, what is she thinking?
Yeah, exactly. I love that. I love that picture. I'm so pleased with the cover and the book. And the other thing that was perfect about that is that the sort of sea, you can see some of the sea or water in the distance, and you see the sort of the grasses, the beach and ocean grasses. And I live on the island of Nantucket off the coast of Massachusetts, and surrounded by the ocean and this big open sky like that. And so that was very meaningful to me. But that is how I felt growing up. I was alone. I was out in the big world with nothing to protect me.
Yeah.
Not literally, but this is how I felt. And and I was sort of directionless. And I was like always looking to the distance, like, where am I going to find answers? Where am I going to be safe? Where am I going to belong? So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's very evocative for me.
Hmm. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Janet. What is the most important message that you want people to get out of this memoir publication?
I want them to know that love is not enough, and that for those of us who are the adoptees, usually in adoption, you hear the narrative of the birth parent and the adoptive parent. You hear about the needs or wants and morality of both sides of that equation. Whether you're judging the morality of birth parent who doesn't want to or can't keep a child, whether you're praising the morality of someone who wants to adopt someone else's child. And you're talking about, people who want a baby, people who can't raise a baby. Those are, but you don't hear about what does that individual need. That's not a helpless baby. That's going to grow. That little baby is going to grow up into a big grown person like myself. What do we need to become a whole, healthy, intact human being? Adoptees have 4 times the suicide rate of the normal population,
Wow.
and that's just one of the traumas. But to live, to be removed from your biological heritage and your kin, and to be raised by strangers, and to be given a different name and different identity, and not know who you truly are, is a very traumatic and very unhealthy um, way to ask someone to live, and it's cruel. And I realize that we need adoption. We can't do away with it. There are children whose families can't keep them. There are people who like to raise them. But we need to be more transparent and more open. And we need to recognize that when you're adopted, you are someone else's child being raised by a strange family. And that fact has to be talked about, accepted. Your all information, including photographs, et cetera, of your biological family should be available to you so you can learn who you are. And that should be respected as well. And I also think that anytime it's possible, that a child should be kept in a biological family, and that just because a family may have more money or more stability doesn't mean it's a more perfect family for the individual, the child who's being taken. So
Yeah.
I hope that people would learn through my book what it really feels like to be the adoptee, and takes that emotional intelligence with them when they are asked to make decisions on issues that we face nowadays. Should our state open adoption records? Gee, how do we think about what the donor conceived individuals are now looking for? What about reproductive rights? I mean, there are a lot of issues today that the way those of us who have been adopted and gone through this institution have information for you that will help you make a better and more informed decision on those and other topics.
Yeah, and that is so very important and so true. And I think it's something that people should not take for granted, but actually look into in a more deeper and positive and detailed way so that we understand how the process works, who is affected by it, and what a positive outcome could actually look like. So, thank you for sharing, Janet. The book was supposed to be published by Forefront Books on May 7th of this year, right?
Yes, it's
Did
out.
that it's out? How
It's out.
was
Yeah.
how was the launch? How did you experience that? What was that
It's
like for you?
well, I mean, it's a lifelong dream to publish a book. That's incredible. But
Right.
I've been so touched by the reactions. I've been getting emails and notes from acquaintances, but people I don't normally talk to, and they're telling me that they learned a new perspective, that they understand things in a different way after reading my book, and how touched they were by it, and I've just been overwhelmed with the I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect anything because I hadn't been through this before. But I am so grateful for the response, and so thrilled that perhaps my writing and what I was trying to say is being communicated, and people's hearts and minds are being opened up to a different perspective on adoption, and hopefully maybe also appreciating the connections they have. Growing up, I often heard people say, "Oh, it doesn't matter. I don't look like my parents, or I don't share the same interests with my parents. That doesn't matter. No one thinks about that." And they only don't think about it if you have it. But
Mm,
if you're without it,
yeah,
it's what you are trying to home back to get just some sense of attachment and
yeah,
connection and belonging. So
yeah,
when you have it, appreciate how much your family has given you just by being born to them and being with them.
yeah. That's very valuable. Thank you for sharing, Janet. In terms of book talks, are you going to be doing any book talks? Because I mean, it is so deep and so personal with regards to the information in the memoir and what you are going to be sharing with people. I mean, they're going to read it, yes, but what about the live interaction between you and the public? through
I
those.
will. Yes,
Yeah.
I will be doing some. I haven't done any live yet. I've done a lot of podcasts and interviews, but not live. I actually next week have the first appearance in Massachusetts that will be live, and I'm looking forward to that. And I have a number of others scheduled in the next few months. So that'll be another new experience, and I look forward to it.
Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. Are we looking possibly sometime in the future at, let me put it this way, some sort of media hype production, maybe a movie?
Well, I don't have any control over that, and I'm certainly not a producer of any kind. So we'll see what life brings my way. But for now, I'm just. It was such a journey writing the book, and it took me 3 years to pull it all together and write it and rewrite it. I didn't realize how often I'd be rewriting the book. Oh my gosh, the number of drafts that I did and then sent off to my editor and got back with all these corrections. It was got very discouraging, but you just keep plowing through and I really enjoyed the process of writing, and I would love to write again. So I hope that there's more to come. I don't have a haven't started anything yet, but I really enjoyed the process and look forward to continuing that.
Wonderful. I think that the emphasis here for you is to sort of change the narrative to a more positive aspect of how people think about rights, loss, grief,
Mhm.
belonging, identity. And I wonder if you at times envision the positive impact that your memoir would make with regards to the conversations that people are having. And at least I think you want them to start having these conversations with regards to these things, because I'm looking at the way in which you put together the title of the book, and you said, Searching for the Arms That Once Held Me, which is key
Mhm.
with regards to the component of getting the message out, how you want people to understand this. How do
Yes.
you see that positive impact making with regards to the conversations that they are now going to have after they understand what your memoir is trying to say?
Thank you, and you really picked up on a lot of details there. I appreciate that. But yeah, I see it happening already, and that would be my greatest wish come true, that people's hearts and minds were opened to the concept of the rights of the adoptees, and that they would start, in the voting booth in their state, vote to open those records for people, to let them know who they really are. In understanding the discussions of donor conceived individuals who are wanting to know about their father's family, they only know half of themselves of their mothers, and why is that important? And why do they? Well, that is important. Um, and in reproductive rights, is just being born and adopted by strangers, necessarily a happy and satisfying life for everybody. I mean, there are lots of conversations that we need to have, and if the understanding of what it feels like to be the individual at the center of this, the one whose life is truly affected by the adoption process, to have a better understanding of that and to bring that to your own knowledge and the decisions you have, the discussions you have with friends, it would be that would be my greatest wish come true. I just so want people to say there's a different perspective that we haven't traditionally heard, a different narrative in this country. And it's really important for a lot of reasons for you to be aware of it and incorporate into your emotional intelligence.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. Are you considering any follow up to this memoir? Any other works in the making for the future, Janet?
Not at this point. Again, I would like to write further.
Yeah,
And I'm not sure if there'd be a follow up to this, but there might be as I live it and experience it. There might be more to write on this or something else. But yes, I want to continue to write. I've always been a writer since I was a little girl, and this is the first book I've had published. And although it was a grueling effort, it was very rewarding, and I'd love to do it again.
wonderful. Thank you so much. So we have had just about half an hour of wonderful engagement with Janet Sherlund with regards to her memoir. And now I will just put up some information on the screen. And so, Janet, tell the people how they can make contact with you if they need you to get some information more on the memoir as they spark their interest, or how they can get your books now that it is out.
Well, I have a website, which is abandonedатbirthbook.com.
Uh-huh.
And I'm also on Instagram at Janet Sherland Official. And my book is being sold in your local bookstore at bookshop.org, at Simon and at Barnes and Noble.com, on Amazon.com. So all the usual places that you'd buy a book. And I would certainly welcome any comments or thoughts or questions. And anyway, I think one of the basic most motivating things about being adopted is the desire to connect.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, you want to connect with people. So one of the things I love about this is connecting with people and hearing from other adoptees that say that is my truth as well, and non-adoptees saying I never knew.
right.
I love
Exactly.
those conversations.
Exactly. So it's twofold. One, you want people to resonate and identify with your story, and also to say, ah, so this is what it's all about. I understand that. And that's a wonderful way to end this particular interview. So thank you so much, Janet Shilon, for coming by in the studios of Let's Just Read with your memoir. And it's described as heart wrenching, and it has to be because of the experience that you have had and all the things that you've had to go through to get it to this point. Abandoned at birth, searching for the arms that once held me. So people go out and look at the different places and Amazon and so on, and also visit Janet's personal website to get a copy of the book. And if you need to reach out to her, she's willing to have that conversation with regards to how you can know so much more about a similar situation you may have found yourself in, and she can help in so many ways. So, until next time, this is Andy of Andy's Personal Development, leaving you a positive statement saying, even though you may be abandoned, it does not mean that you are lost. And Janet's experience is a fine example of that. So we thank you for your continued commitment and support. And we now say so long, shalom, bye, Godspeed, namaste. Thank you so much.